George Russell climbed out of his Mercedes in Austria looking remarkably calm. There was no wild celebration, no dramatic radio message, no sense that Formula One had just witnessed one of the biggest turning points of the season. But inside the paddock, the mood was very different, because this victory may have meant far more than simply adding another trophy to Russell's collection. It may have changed the direction of the entire championship. At first glance, Austria looked like another successful Sunday for Mercedes. A clean race, a well-executed strategy, a driver who controlled the pressure when it mattered most. Nothing about it seemed particularly revolutionary, but Formula One is rarely judged by what happens on the surface. The real story usually lives underneath. And the more people inside the paddock began analyzing what happened in Spielberg, the more one question started appearing. Was this actually the race that changed everything? That might sound like an overreaction. After all, championships are not decided by one weekend. One victory does not suddenly make a team unbeatable, and George Russell knows that better than anyone. But there are certain races that tell you something bigger is happening, not because of the points, because of the message they send. Austria may have been exactly that kind of race. For much of the season, Mercedes had been chasing answers. The pace was improving. The car looked increasingly competitive. Yet there always seemed to be one missing piece. Sometimes it was tire management. Sometimes it was qualifying pace. Sometimes it was race execution. The ingredients were there. The complete package wasn't. Then came Austria, and suddenly, everything looked different. The interesting part is not that Mercedes won. It is how they won. Throughout the weekend, Russell never looked like a driver simply hoping circumstances would fall his way. He looked like someone completely comfortable with the car underneath him. Every session added confidence. Every lap reinforced the feeling that Mercedes had finally found something. That confidence matters, because confidence inside Formula One spreads quickly. It spreads from the driver to the engineers, from the engineers to the strategists, from the garage to the factory. Before long, an entire organization begins operating differently. That is exactly why people inside Formula One pay so much attention to momentum. Momentum cannot be measured on a timing screen, but everyone knows when it arrives. And Austria may have been the clearest sign yet that Mercedes is beginning to build it. What makes this story even more fascinating is George Russell himself. For years, he has carried a unique role inside Mercedes. He was the future. Then he became the teammate of Lewis Hamilton. Now, with Hamilton wearing Ferrari red, Russell has become the unquestioned leader of the team. That is a very different kind of pressure. Winning races is one thing. Leading one of Formula One's biggest organizations is something else entirely. Every piece of feedback matters. Every development direction matters. Every public comment carries more weight than before. Austria felt like the first weekend where Russell truly embraced that responsibility, not just as the driver, but as the reference point. That shift could prove incredibly important over the second half of the season, because championship teams need more than speed. They need leadership, and leadership often becomes most visible when the pressure is highest. The Austrian Grand Prix delivered exactly that. Mercedes faced constant questions throughout the weekend. Would the upgrades work? Could they match the pace of their rivals over a full race distance? Was the recent progress genuine, or simply circuit-specific? By Sunday evening, many of those questions had very different answers. Russell's performance did more than secure 25 valuable points. It gave Mercedes belief, and belief can be a dangerous thing in Formula One. History has shown that teams often become most competitive immediately after a breakthrough weekend. Not because they suddenly discover huge amounts of lap time, because they stop second-guessing themselves. Development becomes clearer, communication improves, decision-making becomes more decisive. Everyone starts pulling in the same direction. That possibility is exactly why Austria has attracted so much attention. Because if Mercedes has finally reached that stage, then the rest of the grid may have a bigger problem than they first realized. The timing could not be more significant. Ferrari has been building momentum. McLaren continues to fight near the front. Every race has become increasingly difficult to predict. Yet right in the middle of that battle, Mercedes may have quietly reminded everyone why it spent so many years dominating Formula One. Not through headlines, not through bold claims, through execution. The race itself reflected that. Every strategic call appeared measured. Every pit stop felt controlled. Russell rarely looked under serious pressure. Even when rivals tried to force Mercedes into difficult decisions, the team responded with confidence. That confidence was impossible to ignore. Which brings us to the bigger question. Was Austria simply George Russell's finest drive of the season? Or was it the first real glimpse of a Mercedes team beginning to rediscover the standards that once made it almost impossible to beat? Because if the answer is the second one, then George Russell's victory may represent much more than a race win. It may represent the moment Mercedes officially re-entered the championship conversation. And if that is true, then Austria was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Because behind Russell's victory, another development was quietly unfolding. One that could have an even greater impact on the title fight than the race itself. If Austria had simply been about one perfectly executed race, the conversation would have ended by Monday morning. Formula One moves quickly. Every weekend brings another headline, another winner, another storyline. But Austria has refused to disappear, not because George Russell won, because of what the victory appeared to reveal about Mercedes. That is where the bigger picture starts to emerge. Throughout the first part of the season, Mercedes often looked like a team searching for consistency. There were flashes of genuine pace, strong qualifying performances, competitive race stints, but just when it seemed the team had turned a corner, another weakness would appear. One weekend, tire degradation became the problem. The next, race pace wasn't quite there. Then strategy came under scrutiny. The potential was obvious. The execution wasn't always complete. Austria felt different. For the first time in several races, Mercedes looked completely in control. Not just of the race, of itself. That distinction matters, because championship-winning teams rarely panic. Even when things become difficult, they trust the process. Watching Mercedes throughout the Austrian weekend, that confidence appeared to return. The engineers looked calm. The strategy calls came without hesitation. Russell sounded relaxed over the radio. Nothing felt rushed. Nothing felt desperate. It looked like a team that believed it already had the answers. And that confidence may have been just as important as the victory itself. The interesting part is how quickly that changes the championship conversation. Only a few weeks ago, much of the attention centered on Ferrari's resurgence. Lewis Hamilton was beginning to find rhythm. Charles Leclerc remained a consistent threat. McLaren continued collecting valuable points. Mercedes was still part of the conversation, but rarely at the center of it. Austria changed that almost overnight because now rival teams have another question to answer. How much faster can this Mercedes become? That uncertainty is what makes Formula One so fascinating. Teams are constantly trying to judge each other's progress. Every upgrade, every setup change, every strategic decision becomes valuable information. And if Austria truly reflected Mercedes's current level, then everyone else suddenly has another competitor to worry about. George Russell's role in all of this cannot be overlooked. For years, people have spoken about his potential. His speed was never questioned, neither was his consistency. The bigger question was always whether he could become the driver capable of carrying Mercedes back to championship contention. Austria may have offered the strongest evidence yet that the answer is yes, because Russell didn't simply drive quickly. He managed the race, he controlled the pace, he responded whenever pressure arrived. Those are the qualities that separate race winners from championship contenders. Anyone can produce one brilliant afternoon. Very few drivers can repeatedly deliver under expectation. That is why Austria feels significant. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't chaotic. It was controlled, almost clinical. And Mercedes noticed. After the race, much of the discussion inside the paddock focused on how comfortable Russell appeared throughout the weekend. That comfort usually comes from one place. Trust. Trust in the car. Trust in the engineers. Trust in the strategy. When all three begin working together, the results often follow. Mercedes seems to be reaching that point. Of course, one race never guarantees future success. Formula One has a habit of changing incredibly quickly. One upgrade can transform the competitive order. One mistake can undo weeks of progress. One retirement can completely reshape a championship. Everyone inside Mercedes understands that, which is why nobody is celebrating as though the job is already done. If anything, Austria has increased the pressure, because now expectations are different. Winning once creates excitement. Winning again creates belief. And belief changes everything. That brings us to another important detail. While Russell celebrated his victory, rival teams were already looking ahead. Every engineer was asking the same question. Was Austria circuit-specific, or has Mercedes genuinely unlocked something? The answer could shape the remainder of the season. If the pace was unique to Spielberg, then the championship picture changes very little. But if Mercedes has finally understood its car in the way championship teams usually do, then Austria becomes something much bigger. It becomes a turning point. The race people look back on months later and say, that was the moment everything started changing. Because championships are rarely won by the fastest car alone. They are won by the team that improves the quickest. And right now, Mercedes looks like a team learning faster than it has all season. That possibility should concern every rival, especially Ferrari, especially McLaren. Because while they have been focusing on beating each other, Mercedes may have quietly rebuilt itself into a genuine title contender. The next few races will reveal whether Austria was simply a brilliant weekend or the beginning of something much more dangerous. And if George Russell continues driving with the same confidence he showed in Spielberg, the championship battle may be about to become far more complicated than anyone expected. The fascinating thing about Formula One is that the biggest moments are not always obvious when they happen. Sometimes a race is simply a race. Other times it becomes the beginning of an entirely different story. Austria has the feeling of being one of those weekends, not because George Russell suddenly became a different driver, but because Mercedes suddenly looked like a different team. That distinction could prove crucial over the coming months. For much of the season, the championship conversation has revolved around one question. Who has the fastest car? Austria may have introduced a much more important one. Who has the fastest rate of improvement? Those are two very different things. Raw speed can disappear from one circuit to the next. Development rarely does. If a team finally understands its car, every future upgrade becomes more effective. Every setup decision becomes easier. Every race weekend begins with greater confidence. That is exactly why Russell's victory has attracted so much attention. The win itself was impressive. What happened behind it may have been even more important. Mercedes looked united. The engineers appeared confident in every major decision. The strategy unfolded almost exactly as planned. Russell delivered every lap the team needed. Nothing about the performance suggested luck. It looked prepared. It looked rehearsed. Most importantly, it looked repeatable. That is the word rival teams dislike hearing: repeatable. One surprise victory can be dismissed, 2 or 3 cannot. That is why the next few races suddenly feel so significant. Everyone across the paddock will be watching Mercedes closely. Was Austria the beginning of a genuine resurgence? Or was it simply the perfect weekend at the perfect circuit? The answer will shape the rest of the championship. George Russell now finds himself in a position many expected would eventually come. He is no longer viewed simply as Mercedes' future. He is the present. The responsibility that once belonged to Lewis Hamilton now rests firmly on his shoulders. And based on what Austria showed, Russell appears ready for it. Throughout the weekend, he displayed the kind of composure normally associated with experienced title contenders. There were no unnecessary risks, no emotional decisions, just consistent execution from the first lap to the last. That maturity could become one of Mercedes' greatest strengths. Because championship campaigns are rarely built on spectacular moments alone. They are built on minimizing mistakes, collecting points, making the right decisions when the pressure is highest. Austria suggested Mercedes may finally be doing exactly that. There is another reason this victory feels important. Momentum has a strange effect inside Formula One. One strong result can completely change the atmosphere inside a factory. Engineers arrive on Monday with renewed confidence. Development meetings become more productive. Ideas that once carried uncertainty suddenly gain support. Success creates belief. Belief creates progress. Progress creates even more success. That cycle has defined every dominant team in modern Formula One. Mercedes knows it better than anyone. The question now is whether Austria has restarted that cycle. If it has, Ferrari, McLaren, and every other rival may have far more to worry about than a single race winner. They may have to deal with a Mercedes team rediscovering the confidence that once made it nearly unbeatable. And perhaps that is the biggest takeaway from Spielberg. George Russell did not simply collect another trophy. He reminded the entire paddock what Mercedes is capable of when everything clicks. The championship suddenly feels more open. The pressure has shifted. The margins have become even smaller. Every upcoming race now carries greater importance because nobody can be entirely sure where Mercedes' true ceiling lies. That uncertainty is exactly what makes Formula One so compelling. The story is no longer about one Austrian Grand Prix. It is about what Austria may have started. A driver stepping fully into the role of team leader. A team beginning to trust its direction once again. A championship fight that suddenly has another serious contender. Maybe George Russell's Austrian Grand Prix victory will eventually be remembered as just another win. Or maybe, months from now, fans will look back at Spielberg and realize it was the weekend everything changed. Because sometimes one race does more than decide a winner. Sometimes it changes the entire direction of a season. And if Austria proves to be one of those races, George Russell's greatest achievement won't simply be standing on the top step of the podium. It will be reminding Formula One that Mercedes is back in the fight. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the latest Formula One stories. Do you think George Russell's Austrian GP victory marks the beginning of a Mercedes comeback, or was it simply the perfect weekend? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.